And joining us now is economics reporter for The Washington Post, the aforementioned Jeff Stein. Great friend of the show. Great to see you, Jeff.
Thanks so much for having me.
Okay, so you have the latest details on what the Biden White House here is planning with regards to student debt relief. Let's go ahead and put this up on the screen. Latest White House plan would forgive $10,000 in student debt per borrower. So just break this down for us. What are they actually planning on doing, and when are they planning on doing it?
So I want to be careful here to avoid being too definitive because like many things in the White House, there will be plan after plan after plan, and then we won't see the fruition of that plan. We can go down the list of dozens of things for which that has happened, but I have reported, as you guys demonstrated, that the White House currently has a plan that I know that the economists have been working on, that is their current iteration, to cancel $10,000 per borrower below an income threshold of around $150,000 for singles and $300,000 per couple. There's been an outcry. Senator Schumer and Senator Warren have been calling for up to $50,000 in cancellation per borrower. The NAACP called our story the reported $10K in cancellation, throwing a bucket of water on a forest fire. So there's been an immense pushback from our story to this reported amount. On the other hand, people would say, this is 3 times the amount of the annual child tax credit that did so much to alleviate poverty. Close to half of student borrowers owe $20,000 or less. So this would be a very meaningful cut to really a huge population, 20 million people or so. But the key question remains, is Biden going to do this? We think, he has indicated publicly that he wants to do this. We have ample reporting that the White House itself has been preparing this, but I just want to be very clear, so you don't yell at me,
right?
Because I'm not in charge of this. Not my fault. That it's still possible that Biden changes his mind at the last minute. I don't think that's going to happen, but it's still theoretically an option.
I want to stick with this because this is fascinating to me. Let's talk about some of these past things. They didn't materialize. Why? I mean, based upon the people that you talk to, like what is going on inside of this building where it seems that the decision-making process is extraordinarily haphazard. They always want credit for something that they're gonna do, but then they don't actually end up doing it. So what is it like? Just describe the process for people here who are like, why does nothing seem to be getting done inside of this White House?
Yeah, I know you guys want like the insider juicy, the tidbits.
Sure.
I think there seems to be a pattern of a sort of crisis of decision-making in this administration. I think the tariffs are a really good example where we've seen basically since the administration began, that there was pressure, that Democrats were freaking out about the tariffs imposed by Trump on China, that they were essentially a tax on consumers, that they would raise costs for middle-class families, and yet most of those tariffs remain in effect.
Right.
Despite inflation, many economists that are close to the White House will say this is the administration's #1 lever to deal with inflation. You take the tariffs off. I mean, obviously there are people who say you need that to counter China,
yes,
but it's been months and months of deliberations and indecision over this. And I think what brought this student debt question to a head right now is that on the most important thing that they have said that they're going to do and haven't done, in my opinion, on the economic front, the Build Back Better Act, fell apart, right, in the fall. I think I was on the show saying correctly over and over again that, they're about to get a deal, Jeff Wooden's coming, and then I would say, like, my sources are telling me it's coming soon, and then that would turn out to be wrong and wrong and wrong. So when that fell apart, there was this sense that, and I kind of want to discuss this with you guys, and I'm curious what you think, but there was this sense that we need to deliver something because the economic promises we've been making, housing, healthcare, climate, prescription drugs, all of that fell apart in the fall and hasn't recovered. So that failure and that failed promise that you're referring to, the failed decision-making, and even though Manchin gave them a $1.8 trillion offer that they didn't take, that has really made it seem like they need to push this process along.
Well, and it seems too like, we've covered the polls here that show, and this is pretty extraordinary for a Democratic president, his lowest approval rating is with the youngest demographic. And it was the exact opposite at the beginning of the administration. His highest approval rating was among the youngest demographic. Now that has completely flipped. The older you go on the age spectrum, the higher the approval rating for Joe Biden. So you ask yourself, like, this is something they could have done on day one. Why did they wait till now? It seems pretty clear that they're looking at the fact they're probably not going to get any other big thing through Congress, at the fact that their approval rating is a disaster with young voters, and saying, well, at least we could give them something. But in the same respect, it seems like what they're proposing is like tailor-made to kind of piss everybody off. It's not universal, it's means tested, it's a lower amount than what, Elizabeth Warren and Chuck Schumer, that bold progressive, were pushing for. In the same respect, you're gonna have people on the right who say, oh, this is inflationary, and what are you doing? This is a giveaway to elite college grads. So, and they also seem to have this habit, this was also during Build Back Better, where you'd announce these popular programs, or you'd flirt with them publicly, and then you just sort of like, get people's hopes up and then ultimately shoot the thing in the head, so that it would have been better if you never said anything about it to start with.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. I really wonder if they had just come out and just done this instead of now we're on...
Building up for over a month.
Yeah. I mean, April 28th, Biden said publicly, we will have a decision on this, I think, in the next couple of weeks. That's a paraphrase.
Yeah.
And it's almost June.
Right.
And so, they have had events that have derailed them, but to your point, we've had now months of internal fighting within the Democratic Party about what this should look like, and it has gotten people very upset in a way that I think if they had just come out and said this, said this is the policy, people would have been excited to hear it, and as you said, not built their hopes up. And now if they don't do anything at all, I think the reaction is going to be horrendous. I mean, I wrote those same polling numbers down before coming here because I thought they were so illustrative. The oldest voters have gone between, the oldest generation, they basically remain flat on Biden. The baby boomers are down 7% on Biden, but millennials and Gen Z down around 20 percentage points each on Biden. That's catastrophic, not just for the midterms, but for Biden's potential reelection, and also for the Democratic Party long term. So yeah, I think I'm curious if, in particular about Saagar's take on whether you think this is sort of deepening the impression that you were just talking about Democratic Party solidified as the party of elites and the college educated, because it seems simultaneously true that the caricature of the student debtor as like a liberal arts major at a fancy college who just didn't want to get a real job, like that is a part of this, but probably a pretty small part. Like most of the student debt is held by people who went to public or for-profit
and especially
college.
People who didn't finish college. Those are the people who get, especially hosts.
Really
I mean, I think the way we talk about it is that in the absence of everything else, it's going to be very difficult to combat that attack, right? Which is that in the absence of help for everybody and for a lot of people, then you do have a selective bailout. I'm not saying I'm even against it, but given the fact that it doesn't change the university incentive system and, a lot... Without fixing the underlying flaws and bailing it out, you are effectively bailing out mostly upper middle class people in this country.
I like your point about like the fact that it comes in this broader context.
Yeah, it's a bigger context, exactly.
Because if this was part of a package that was head-on addressing child poverty and public housing and lack of
credit card
access in red states, I think you could say that this is going to mostly benefit middle and many lower middle class people who desperately need this help, tens of millions of people who are struggling with their student loans. But in a context where all of those things are not happening, this is the only group of people that are getting targeted relief. It looks completely different, and I think doesn't mean they shouldn't do it, but it does raise the question of what are they going to do for people who didn't go to college and are struggling with the highest price increases in 4 decades.
Yeah, I think all of that is fair, and I would like to see them do more for everyone. That doesn't mean that I don't think they should help the group of people that they have like a ready tool to be able to help. And the reality is that, young Americans in particular are really sold a bill of goods on college. Even the college wage premium now is diminishing. The people who, as you point out, got the most screwed are people who went to like these, scammy for-profit colleges or weren't unable to finish college because of, whatever reason, whether it's an economic reason or another reason. But there was this promise of like, okay, if you go to college, you're going to be good. And not only do the prices skyrocket and you're saddled with this debt for your entire life, most of which is, much of the student loan debt is never going to be ultimately repaid. But then the promise of this sort of like stable middle class life also doesn't come true. So, I think for younger Americans, that's why this has been such a pivotal issue, is not just because of the debt burden, but also because of the sort of lie that they were sold in terms of the trajectory of their life. But, Jeff, go ahead if you want.
I saw a really interesting statistic that I thought kind of captures some of what you're saying, which is you would think that this issue would be divided sort of on educational lines when you look at the polling, and it is to some extent, but a lot of the numbers the White House I know have looked at actually shows that this is just almost purely generational. That even people who didn't go to college, have no student debt in our age cohort, overwhelmingly support this, even if it doesn't materially benefit them, because they see exactly what you're talking about, that this was a bill of goods that people were sold that turned out to be completely phony, and that the student default rates, for, especially for Black borrowers, people of color, are astronomical. And so when you look at this broader question, is there a systemic injustice being done at the core of our education system? I think people would rightfully say that there's something there, and I just find that fascinating that young people, even if they aren't personally affected by this, have sort of this sense of solidarity because they know someone who is. And for older people, even if they may have a little bit of student debt, they don't see it as this society-wide crisis in the same way.
Well, because they just never had to experience it. This is where I'm most, whenever I hear them talk about how much they paid, I'm like, yeah, well, it doesn't work that anymore.
Yeah, I paid off my college debt with 3 shifts in the cafeteria.
It's like, okay, well, I think that's awesome. And I think that should be available to everybody, but it's not. So let's just all be honest.
Yeah, I mean, my dad grew up in the Great Depression in West Virginia. That he lived in a one-room trailer that his dad built. And he was able to go to, a solid public university at West Virginia University and pay for it himself and ultimately become a PhD physicist and work for the government and do good things with his life.
Yeah.
That's just, it's gone. I mean, that's just, and listen, let's acknowledge the privilege of being a white man at that time and all of those things, but that path is gone. And so this is would be a tiny step towards at least acknowledging that people have gotten completely screwed. But Jeff, I am curious, some of the things the White House does, or just the way they approach it, it really is perplexing to me. What do you think leads to them, doing this dance where they sort of leak some that we might do something, maybe not, and it's very amorphous, and then people end up disappointed, and there seems to be a lot of their actions are more reactive to events rather than asserting an affirmative vision, going out and fighting for it. Even on, I know this is not your lane, but on the gun debate, Biden makes these kind of maximalist comments about maybe we should get rid of handguns, but then in terms of actually even wading into the congressional debate, he hasn't even talked to a single Republican. They won't put a representative on the Sunday shows to even advocate for things like universal background checks, which are overwhelmingly popular. What's the vibe there? What's the political thinking? How is this happening?
I think if I were to take a step at a non-personality based answer to that question, because I think there must be sort of idiosyncratic character traits that explain what you're referring to. But I think the broader thing that's happening is that there are tectonic shifts in the Democratic Party that Biden, maybe this is part of the reason that he won the primary, but that he is on a different page than a lot of prominent members in the party, including members of the White House that are staff the White House at very high levels. So I think there are people who are advocating forcefully for things like student debt cancellation that Biden has for decades been skeptical of, right? Or he's been public that he is uneasy with this idea, but the demands of leading a legislative coalition bring you to places that you may not necessarily support. And I think that's maybe at the bottom of what seems like a fractured approach a lot of the time for the White House. I would also say that Republicans like to say that it's Ron Klain and the White House Chief of Staff, that he's the core problem, and that he's the one that's leading Biden to sort of flail. And I think people discount to what extent Biden himself is actually really involved in all these decisions and in the room and was hands-on. I have a story hopefully coming later this week on this question about how did Build Back Better fall apart. But I think Biden himself, is more involved than people think in a lot of these questions.
Yeah, it used to drive me crazy under Trump too. You know, people would do this. They're like, "Oh, Jared." I'm like, "Yeah, Jared," but also, you know, Trump is the president. Like, you know, it's just like the same thing here. Like, oh, Ron Klain and Susan Rice and all these people. I'm like, yeah, but Biden is the president. He actually has a significant say in what's happening here and how exactly things go about. I mean, to the extent that there's dithering and there's chaos. I mean, look, that is a direct indictment of him as a manager. I don't think you could get around
It's
that.
also consistent with reports of how he ran his Senate office and also how he ran his vice presidential office, a little bit of which I had sort of brief insight into, which is that he is both a micromanager and incapable of making decisions.
I didn't realize you worked for Biden. That's incredible.
So I didn't directly work for Biden, but I was involved in the early discussions of him running in 2016. And so I got to see a little bit of the dysfunction up close and personal. And I mean, that was effectively the problem, is he wants to be involved in every decision down to the minute detail, but he is incapable of like actually making a decision. And so you end up with a group of people who are just completely hamstrung. I mean, that's the worst of all worlds in terms of a manager. You can either be a great delegator and you put great people around you, you trust their decision making, or you're super hands-on, but you're on it and you're capable of making decisions. And so, you know, it was always sort of interesting to me during the campaign. There was this idea of like, oh, the adults are going to be back in charge. It's going to be competent. I was like, have you actually observed how Biden has run any of his political offices before? Because there are a lot of positive traits you might use to describe how he's been in Washington and, you know, the sort of like genuine warmth and affection that people have towards him personally. But managerial competence was not a key Biden trait ever in his 40 years in Washington.
And that was the key selling point of the campaign, right? You put aside your passion, your ideological commitments a little bit, and you go with someone who's trusted, who will maybe share some of your goals and work with you to enact them. But his pitch to young voters in particular was, I know how to do this.
Right.
Well, we're all finding that out.
He does not, it turns out.
Jeff, we always appreciate your insight, your reporting. Excellent. Everybody go follow Jeff on Twitter. Read his stuff over.
Are you just at Jeff Stein? I mean, I follow you.
J Stein Wapo.
J Stein Wapo, that's right, on Twitter, guys. Go give him a follow. We always lean on his reporting for our economic analysis.
We lean on him significantly. And thank you all so much for your support looking over at this camera. We really appreciate it. 1 year anniversary is tomorrow. Can't even believe it. We're going to have a special highlight reel of all the cool stories that we've covered. We're going to be back here, obviously, on Thursday. Premium subscribers, you guys got that special State of the Breaking Points. Make sure you guys check that out. It's just about how we're spending your hard-earned money in order to build a brand new network over here. And also, thank you to all the premium subscribers who continue to come in every day. You guys are really helping us out. If you want to help us on this mission, link is in the description, and we will see you all on Thursday.
Love you guys. See you Thursday. Cable news is ripping us apart, dividing the country, making it impossible to function as a society, and making it impossible to know just what is true and what is false. But the good news is they are failing and they know it.
That is why we're building something new, a new mainstream, a healthier one, something more trustworthy, something that we are going to need in one of the most pivotal times in American history. We are building up here for the midterms, for the upcoming presidential election, but we need your help. So if you can help us out by becoming a premium member today at breakingpoints.com, we're trying to change America for the better and the entire world.
So what are you waiting for, guys? Go to breakingpoints.com and sign up and help us build a new mainstream.